Welcome. Thank you for coming to my program today. This is Cooking 104 Curry. This is the fourth in a series of programs that I've been doing that focus on cooking techniques and sort of demystifying the process of cooking some of the more ostensibly daunting cuisines. Despite the name, each of these is its own separate standalone program. First, we learned about the mother sauces. Then we did some holiday side dishes. And the last program that I did was sushi. So today we're going to talk a bit about curry. There really isn't any such thing as curry, traditionally. At the same time, there are several variations on curry depending on what part of the world you're in. But I'm going to be focusing on like Indian cuisine today. The information that I'm giving you is coming from a few sources, including Ravi Manayam from that'scurry.com, Meta Aurora from pipingpotcurry.com, Iza Chema from teaforturmeric.com, and Karishma Pradhan from homecookingcollective.com. In that last website, there's an article where Karishma relates a quote from a book, Curry, A Tale of Cooks and Conquerors by Lizzie Collingham. The idea of a curry is, in fact, a concept that Europeans imposed onto Indian cuisine. Indians typically would refer to their different dishes by like their specific names. When they were serving a British person with a dish, they might call it, for example, Rogan Josh or Dopyaza or Karama, but the British just kind of lumped all these together under the name curry. When we talk about curry, what we're talking about is an exchange of culinary practices between India and other South Asian regions and the Portuguese, British, and other European countries. This can include a wide variety of dishes, ranging from very dry but heavily spiced meat dishes to very thin soups. For example, one might be tempted to make a Texas-style ground beef curry, but most of us would probably use its actual name, chili. In fact, there are some people that will not even use the term curry because of its imperialist implications. But it's commonly understood enough that we're going to use it here for this program. The word curry itself likely has origins in the Tamil word curry, which refers to, quote, spices used for seasoning or sauteed vegetable and meat dishes. That's from Karishma, Essential Indian Spices and How to Cook with Them. Because I'm not a historian and I'm far from an expert on Indian food, culture, and history, I'm not going to be spending a whole lot of time talking about the history of curry, but I will share information that's taken directly from Ravi Manayam at that'scurry.com. I would encourage you all, if you're interested in this stuff, to check out that article. In his article, Curry, A Journey Through Spice and History, he traces the origins of curry to, quote, the southern tip of the Indian subcontinent and the island of Sri Lanka, end quote. I believe in the old days, Sri Lanka was known as Elam. There is archaeological and historical evidence to suggest that spice trading in this region is at least 3,200 years old and is incredibly important to Tamil culinary tradition. Quote, during the colonial era, the Portuguese established colonies in the north of the island of Elam, introducing chili and various new vegetables from South America, leading to a development of Tamil Portuguese innovative chili powder, end quote. This introduction of chilies and chili powder to the region had a huge impact on Tamil cooking and forms a major part of the history of curry itself. Basically, before the 16th century, there weren't chili peppers in that region. It was after that point where the notoriety for being like spicy and heavily peppered comes to Indian food. Now that we've talked a little bit about that history, we'll talk a little bit about what I'm going to be making, which is specifically a chana masala. Chana meaning garbanzo bean or chickpeas, and masala meaning blend, so it just refers kind of to the mix of spices. We're going to be talking about mise en place, which I've talked about in previous Cooking 100X programs, tempering or blooming of spices, and also toasting. Lastly, the masalas themselves. We're going to be using a variation of garam masala for this dish, along with a few extra spices. This is mine that I made up for this program. Garam means warm, and it's an apt name because this blend, which I think is the most commonly used masala blend in Indian food, is usually made with warm spices, nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon, cumin. An important thing to note is that there are many, many different types of masalas, and even ones that have the same name are not always going to be exactly the same. It's one of the things that makes Indian cuisine really exciting, an emphasis on crafting and perfecting your own spice blends, and it allows for a nearly infinite range of food experiences. One's own masala recipe is often like a point of pride for people. You're constantly tweaking and perfecting your masala blend to make it better. Once this recipe starts, things are going to progress pretty quickly, and timing can be very important, so you want to make sure you have everything in your mise en place ready to go. Mise en place is French for everything in its place, all the ingredients ready to use and close by. For this chana masala, you'll need your garam masala style spice blend, whole cumin seeds, onions, garlic, fresh ginger, which I couldn't find, so I have this ginger here, and chilies, which I'm using serrano chilies that you finely chopped. You can use fresh tomatoes that you've finely chopped. I'm just using canned crushed tomatoes, and you'll need your cooking oil. We'll get your pan heating up, and we're gonna add oil. You'll wanna use a neutral, think like a grapeseed oil. I'm using sunflower oil. Canola is probably also fine, although I think less often used in Indian cuisine. Get this oil in here, let our pan heat up, probably gonna take a minute here. Once we do that, we're gonna add our onions and our cumin seeds. These dishes use a lot of spices. One important factor is how you're treating the spices. A lot of that starts with some dry toasting. Cooking the spices can deepen the flavors. It can also very much change the flavors. Cardamom is a pretty good example. It can be kind of bitter if you're just using it raw, but as you cook it, that bitterness kind of goes away and other flavors sort of come out. Gives it a little bit more of like an earthy flavor to it. Let's go ahead and test our oil here. Getting close. I'm just on a medium heat, by the way, using sunflower oil like I said. I've got my onions and my cumin seeds already mixed up. Now, the reason why I am using cumin seeds at the first step here is for basically the same reason that I was just starting to talk about with spices. Another aspect of like when you add them is, it stands to reason if it's a whole spice, it's gonna cook slower than like your ground up spices. So because these are whole cumin seeds, we don't have to worry as much about them burning, so we can add them earlier on in the process. And you really, depending on what you're going for, you really do want to add your spices with these complex spice blends as early as you can if you're trying to go for a more evenly spread flavor. For example, like when we add the chilies, if we added the chilies at the end of the process, which we're not going to do, but you could do, you're going to get a stronger like spice and heat from the chilies because they haven't had time to cook down as much. If you've ever had like onions that have been cooked down for a really long time, they become sweet. But we know that onions, when you eat them raw, are not sweet. They've got a little bit of a kick to them. It's the exact same concept with spices. Their flavors change, different parts of them break down, and when you add spices earlier in the process, it gives them more time to spread evenly throughout. We're gonna let our onions and cumin seeds cook down for a couple minutes here. We're not looking for them to get, super dark, just enough so they're kind of translucent. Soften up a bit. Once our onions have sweated down a little bit, now is when we're going to add our chilies and our garlic. And normally at this point, I would add the ginger as well, but because I was not able to find fresh ginger, either because they didn't have it or I'm not very good at looking, I'm not going to add it quite yet just to make sure that it doesn't, burn. But basically going to be just doing the exact same thing, letting this stuff sweat down a bit. It's already starting to smell good. I've talked about it before, but things like onions, peppers, carrots, celery, to a lesser extent, I think chili peppers, but also I would put them in the same category. A lot of cuisines would refer to these as like aromatic vegetables. They form the basis of most soups, sauces. You have your French mirepoix, which is your onions, carrots, celery. You have variations on that where instead of celery, you might use peppers. This makes sauces, makes gumbos, makes all sorts of stuff, and it's no different in Indian cuisine. This is a very simple recipe, but a lot of the recipes for other things, pork vindaloo, or other curries that you see, are probably going to start nearly identically. Might be some variation, might be some difference in when you add your spices, whether you toast them beforehand or not, but a lot of times they're going to start with this cooking down of your aromatics and kind of going from there, adding liquid, adding other ingredients. If at any point you experience sticking with the onions or whatever in the pan, you can always deglaze the pan with a little bit of water. That helps to kind of scrape some of the fond off. So, while this is finishing up, this is the point where we are going to add in our spice blend. I'm also going to add some salt, help break down the vegetables a little bit. This is my blend that I made for this, but this is most closely related to the authentic chana masala recipe that I'm giving out here. A little bit different, but functionally the same. Mostly the spices are different. I'm not sure if I could remember to tell you what different spices I use. Mainly, instead of using like a garam masala pre-made blend, I just made my own. Coriander, cumin, clove, a little bit of nutmeg, turmeric. I did actually use a little bit of curry powder blend from the store, which I'll talk a little bit about. If anybody is interested in the specific spice blend that I use, I do have it written down somewhere. I just forgot to print it. So we're going to get these in, and this is where our blooming / tempering come in. I mentioned toasting spices already. When you dry toast spices, you want to get your pan hot, and then usually you want to take the pan off of the heat, add your spices in, and it's a very, very quick turnaround. The difference between a burnt spice and a perfectly toasted spice can be a fine line sometimes, so you want to be really careful that you're not exposing the spices to too much direct heat. When we're doing it like this is what's known as blooming or tempering. That basically just means to cook spices in a fat, oil, butter, ghee, whatever. And so we're not going to have this going for too long. We're going to make sure that it gets spread evenly throughout our aromatics here, but not leave it in too long so that we don't burn it. Oh, I forgot the ginger. I apologize. The ginger was supposed to go in first, but won't make too much of a difference here. Get that incorporated. Just going to take this off for a second while I incorporate, just so we don't risk burning anything here. And then we're going to add our tomatoes. I'm using about 1.5 times the amount of everything that's called for on that recipe card. So I used an onion and a half. I'm using about 20-ish ounces of tomato, about 45 ounces of garbanzo beans. Yeah. So now that that's all incorporated, we're gonna let this again cook down for about 2 minutes or so. Just let that tomato cook in there a little bit. Always be careful when you're cooking with tomatoes because it loves to bubble up and spray everywhere.
I see that you're using a cast iron on the induction cooking. Is it a special type of cast iron pan?
Any pan that has like a magnetic bottom is going to work for you. There's not a specific reason I'm using the cast iron other than the fact that this was the bigger pan that I had available to me. Different people have different opinions on this, but typically you don't want to use cast iron when you're cooking tomatoes or other very acidic things because the acid does tend to break down your seasoning on your pan. I usually don't really care. If you're like hardcore about maintaining your pan seasoning, that's a good thing to know. Ooh, okay. Sorry to say, it might be too spicy.
I'm kind of thinking so.
Yeah, I do apologize. I'm going to put a little bit more salt just for seasoning, and then I think that's really all we need with the tomato. So now is when we're going to add one of the final steps here. We're going to add our chickpeas. You can use fresh. They require being soaked for about a day beforehand. As I get to the point here where it's going to be a lot of waiting, I'm going to talk about a few other recipe ideas that you can kind of use, talk about their similarities and differences, and then I can answer some questions. But we got our chickpeas in, adding about 1.5 cups of water. Just going to mix this all up here, and then we're going to just let this cook for about 25 minutes. Even though the chickpeas are fully cooked, you do still want to cook them for a while more to make them soft. Unless you really, really like the texture of raw, but not really chickpeas. Which I don't, so. Normally you would cover this, so I'm just gonna really hope that this doesn't make a huge mess. Once the chickpeas and the water are in, you wanna bring this to a boil, reduce the heat down and let it simmer for 20-25 minutes. A lot of recipes will use pretty similar ingredients and techniques, like I mentioned, or at the very least you can adapt these techniques to a lot of different dishes. As I mentioned before, the masala is probably the most important aspect of any of these. The types of spices that you use is going to drastically affect the flavor of the dish, and you can experiment with any of these dishes by just changing up your spice blend. It can have a really profound impact on the flavor profile. Add a little bit more water, use a little bit less water if you want it more or less soupy, that kind of thing. Another really popular curry dish is pork vindaloo. You'll start with a blend of ground Kashmiri chili peppers, cinnamon, cumin, black pepper, turmeric, and clove, mixed with vinegar and salt. You're gonna toss your pork pieces that you've cubed up or whatever into that blend, and you're going to let it marinate overnight. When it's time to cook, the process will feel very familiar to this if you've made this. You're going to cook your onions, then your garlic and ginger in a pot or pan with oil until browned and softened. You're going to add your pork mixture and cook until the pork gets firm before adding water to it, bringing it to a boil, and then reducing it and letting it simmer until the meat is tender. And in the end, stir in some more vinegar as well as green chili and continue to cook it until it reduces and thickens up. Another example is paneer kafta, a dish of fried cheese and potato balls in a gravy. You start with an onion and tomato boil, saute onions in oil with green cardamom, cinnamon, and cloves, and then add tomatoes and cashews plus a small amount of water, and cook until everything softens up. You'll cool the mixture and blend it until it's smooth, and then you'll saute oil with bay leaf, cinnamon, green cardamom, garlic, and ginger. That's that tempering. Do that very briefly on a medium heat. Turn down the temperature, add your chili powder, garam masala, coriander powder, sugar, and salt, and then stir briefly to incorporate everything before adding in that puree that you made. Just add water and cook until the gravy thickens up. You can add some crushed dried fenugreek leaves, mix before tasting it for seasoning, and then at the end you add some heavy whipping cream, incorporate that to add some creaminess to the texture. For the kofta itself, boil potatoes until they're tender, but not soft. Crumble the potatoes along with some paneer, which is like a basic cheese, cornstarch, ginger, garlic, garam masala, green chili, coriander, cashews, and salt. You're gonna roll that mixture into balls and then fry it in oil. When they're finished, you let them cool, and then you add your gravy over top of them, and that's it. It's a dish that's typically served cold, but you can serve it warm as well. I'm sure if you've shopped for spices, you've seen the spice blends labeled curry powder. There are actually curry leaves that you can get. Weirdly enough, they're not often used, at least not in Indian curry. There are some examples of Indian dishes that do use them, but very rarely will you see like that curry powder blend especially called for in any type of Indian cuisine, because it's a mix of curry leaves and a bunch of other stuff. Pretty similar to a lot of different masalas, I would think, but it's just not really something that's used, and the curry leaf itself is not commonly used in most Indian cuisine, which I think a lot of people find a little ironic. I do have another recipe I can share, but I think this is as good a time as any to open it up to any questions that anybody has about it while we wait for all this to reduce.
Have you ever made curry with ghee personally?
I've used ghee before.
How does it change up the flavor profile?
Any type of oil that you use is going to change the flavor profile some. If you stick to a neutral oil like grapeseed or canola or sunflower, you're probably going to have pretty consistent results. But like olive oil, for example, is not very commonly used in Indian cuisine. But you could use it. You're just going to get that very strong olive oil flavor. So, yeah, I don't know if I can say specifically, but did you have a question?
You mentioned the ghee and all the ingredients that you mixed so far, to my knowledge, would be vegan, correct? Is there anything that has animal products in it?
No, I don't think so. I wanted to at least make something vegetarian because I have had people request that in the past. But yeah.
Curry leaves, right? And you mentioned that it's not typically used. But I just wondered when it is it used like bay leaf, that you use it, you put it in, and then after it does its thing, you take it out?
Think of it in the same way as you think of like whole versus ground of any other spice. It is often used ground, but you can also use it as a bay leaf. The only difference it would make is you'd want to change when you put it into the recipe. Put it in earlier with the other whole spices to give it longer to cook since it's whole, but if you are using powder, put it in later, kind of a situation. But in terms of how it's used, I think it's mostly the same as any other spice.
My children are vegan, so I'm just asking these questions so that I can maybe adjust. Being that everything that we use doesn't have any animal products in it, if I chose to do something like buttered chicken, I could use a meat alternative.
I think people have different opinions on this, but I think if you're trying to go for something closer to the texture of like a chicken but still non-animal, something like tempeh or maybe even seitan would be like a good alternative. I actually had never even heard of seitan until like 6 months ago, and I had it for the first time in like some kind of stew, and it's really, really delicious. If anybody doesn't know what that is, I'll probably get this a little wrong, but it's basically like you process like a bread product until it's basically nothing but the gluten left over. It like shreds up kind of like pulled pork or something. It's hard to describe, and I'm not super familiar with the process, but it's not as well known, I think. Very popular in like Chinese cuisine for thousands of years from my understanding, but it's one that a lot of people I don't think are familiar with, but I think it makes a really good stew and would work great for like a curry like this.
Are there any restaurants local or any restaurants that have vegan cuisine?
Here in Jackson, I think it's probably pretty limited. I know there are in Ann Arbor. I don't know if I can shout out any specifically, but you definitely are able to find more out that way. There's a new ramen place, House of Umami. I think they might have some kind of Japanese curry style dish. Yeah. Yes.
I've never been there, but there might be an Indian restaurant in our boat.
Yeah, I'd love to check it out. Jackson's okay as far as its culinary variety, but I think it could be a lot better. I was really excited when House of Umami came because we didn't have like a ramen shop, but there's still a lot of like empty spaces that could be filled. It's definitely gotten better. I've only lived in Jackson for a few years, but I grew up just south of here, so I've been coming here for decades, and it's definitely changed a lot, and I think it's moved in a good direction as far as the type of food that's available.
That's a ginger paste.
Yeah, I would have preferred to get some fresh ginger. I would have cooked it at the same time as the green chilies and the garlic. In terms of flavor, this is just as fine. I guess the one downside of it is the common garnish for this dish specifically is thin slices of fresh ginger, which I was going to do, but can't do that with the paste.
One sheet here says something about baking powder.
If you add baking powder or even baking soda at the same time as you add the chickpeas, it can create a softer chickpea for that. And it works really well for like meats and stuff too. I actually made some chicken a few weeks ago where I don't do this often, but I just threw a little bit of baking soda in with my marinade, and it helps tenderize the meat. It's a cool little hack. I didn't choose to employ it here, but it's perfectly fine to do if you find that you like that texture a little bit more.
We do ours raw for beans and use an Instant Pot. So when I put the soda in and cook it in an Instant Pot, do you know?
That's a good question. I've never experimented with that. My gut instinct is to say if you added the baking powder or baking soda at the point of soaking, that might be too much, or it might have some other adverse reaction just from the extent of time that you have to soak them. If I were doing it, I would probably just stick to soaking them normally and then adding it while I'm cooking.
And then I had a question on red curry paste, green curry paste, and
Yep.
all that. How do you know which one to use? There's a difference in them.
I don't really use them much, but from my understanding, they really are just like all of the spices and core components of the gravy itself pasted all together. What I would always rely on is just looking at the ingredients. Your red curry powders are probably going to have more like Kashmiri chilies. Greens are probably going to have more like cardamom. It's just the ingredients. I would treat them the same way you would treat any like masala blend. If you go to the store and you're picking up garam masala, read the ingredients and you can see what they're actually using. They're almost certainly going to be using coriander, cumin, nutmeg, cinnamon, those kinds of things, but they might have other stuff. Turmeric, I don't know if I said that. Actually, a lot of garam masala blends at the store often leave out turmeric. I would treat it the same way, focusing on what type of masala you want to use. Do the same thing with the curry paste. Just read the ingredients and say, okay, this one seems to be more warm spices, this one seems to be more spice chilies and stuff.
I think the pastes come in handy, like when you're on vacation or if you're cooking at someone else's house and you don't have access to all the spices that you normally would. It kind of just makes it easy.
I watched a video on YouTube recently. I wish I could remember the title of it or what the guy's name was. I will tell you it was from the channel Wired, which does a series of videos where they have like an expert in a subject who just answers questions from the internet. It was a very informative video, and I kind of watched it in preparation for this. When it came to just like defining what a curry is, it's really just a heavily spiced gravy on meats or vegetables. So when you're using a paste like that, yeah, it's very convenient. I think they're really great. I don't see any like issue with using them if you like the flavor with them. They're really just building up your gravy. I keep calling it gravy, sauce. It's all kind of interchangeable. Traditionally, it would be more often referred to as a gravy than a curry, but we think of gravy as like a roux plus stock kind of a thing. Point is, treat that as your base, and then everything else is just kind of your preference. Do you want meat? Do you want meat substitute? Do you want this kind of vegetable, that kind of vegetable? There isn't anything to be scared of or nervous about when it comes to making curry. There's a lot of freedom and a lot of possibility. Anybody have any other questions? We're getting closer. This is still not quite where I want it to be, but it is getting close. You can see that the sauce has thickened up quite a bit. I'd say probably another 10-ish minutes and this will be ready to go. When it's done and the sauce is where we want it, I got my personal potato masher. We're going to mash the chickpeas a little bit just to kind of give them a final chance to absorb some flavor and soften up a little bit. Cook them for another 2-3 minutes, taste for seasoning, and garnish, and it's going to be ready to go. I don't have a whole lot else to say at the moment, so if anybody has any other questions, let me know.
On a masala, it's like if you're going to a cookbook, would they be putting these names down? Or would they be putting the spices and you have to mix it?
You're talking about like garam masala, chaat
Yeah.
masala. I've been to like a specifically Indian spice store before, and you can get like chaat masala, garam masala, and it's all labeled just like that. Yeah, you can
Do you
definitely.
usually make your own of each one of these, or would you buy them?
I don't usually buy them just because I don't use them often enough to go through like that specific spice blend, and I have a cabinet of 40 spices anyway, so I just kind of mix and do my own thing. But I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it, especially if you're getting it from a place that's, you know, owned and managed by somebody from India. Like, they're going to have something authentic there for sure.
If you mix it yourself, then you put the same amount of each one of them?
No, definitely not. In this blend that I used here, the thing I used the most of was coriander. Things like nutmeg, cinnamon are going to be way overpowering. Those are like the things that you're going to use like the least, and cloves especially. Use the least of those. Things like coriander are going to be on the higher end, cumin, turmeric, that kind of stuff's going to be kind of in the middle.
I have several of these bottles and they're big, and they've been in my pantry for maybe 2 or 3 years because you don't use them
Yeah.
that much. So when I see something like this, I'm thinking, how much of what do I put together here?
Especially the really warm spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, those things are always going to be the lowest because if not, they're just going to overpower absolutely everything.
That's good to know.
Cumin also is very strong and overpowering. Even though this is mostly coriander, the cumin still kind of dominates a lot of the fragrance of it. I think cumin evens itself out a little better than like cloves and stuff do in terms of like not overpowering everything once it's cooked down into the dish, if that makes sense. I don't really have any like scientific backing for that. It's just, that's kind of the vibe I've gotten just from using it a lot. But it's the same thing with like a taco seasoning, you know, like cumin is going to be like that dominant spice, but you can still kind of get away with using more of it. This is looking a lot better. You can see the gravy's getting quite thick now. So we're getting pretty close to finishing it up.
Is there a shelf life on the spices? Beyond a certain time, you wouldn't want to use them because it's broken down?
Yes and no. In the same way as like hot sauces can just kind of sit out on your counter and they're good for a year plus. Spices don't really go bad usually unless there's some kind of other contamination. but they do lose their flavor and their fragrance the longer that they're kept. Really the best way to test it is just to try some, especially if it's something that you haven't really used much of, so there's not like a high chance that something's gotten in it. Oh, and another tip that I would have when it comes to spices, if you're making a spice blend and you want to taste it to see if you like it, always taste it with a little bit of salt. The way our taste receptors work, they're not really designed to taste spices on their own in the same way. Like you can a little bit, but that's more like the salinity of your like saliva helping with that. Salt is a perfect vector for bringing out the flavors of other things. That's why we use it in everything. So whenever you're tasting your spice blend, always try it with a little bit of salt as well, and you'll get a much more accurate representation of what the overall flavor is going to be.
When you say try a little salt, so just kind of take a little salt.
Yeah, so I would just like, I have like a here, and I would just, that's too much salt.
Oh, just put a little bit more.
Way, way, way too much salt. Yep. And then just have them together, and that'll give you a more accurate idea of what the actual flavor profile of your spices are.
Would you not want to mix salt in with what like a solid blend?
I guess it depends on the specific dish you're making, what the order of everything is, because you're not necessarily going to want to add the same amount of salt as your spice blend all the time. So like if you make it like a 1-to-2 ratio or something, you're always getting the same amount of salt. I prefer heavily as a cook to control my salt use as much as possible.
How do you know if you use coarse salt? There's so many salts anymore.
Actively cooking something, I prefer to use kosher salt, which is not a specific type of salt, it's just like that type of grind, basically. And this is coarse sea salt that I'm using here. Functionally, same thing. That's what I always use when I'm cooking. If I'm putting salt on something after it's been cooked, I'm either using table salt or I'm using finishing salt. I very rarely use finishing salt, so I'm not really an expert on it. When you have the really, really fine ground salt, it's going to be a lot stronger, and so it's a little bit harder to control the saltiness, or it's a lot easier to oversalt. I think a lot of chefs like it just because it's a lot easier to kind of do one of these and perfectly control how much you're adding in. I think that's most of it. I don't know if it's necessarily anything beyond that. So I'm feeling good about where this is at. So I'm going to just give this a little crush here.
So is there anything specific that you would serve with a curry or serve curry on, like
Yes.
rice?
Traditionally, you'd use like a naan bread or rice. There's probably other things too that are traditional that I'm not really an expert on. But yeah, you would typically serve it with some kind of bread or rice. I was actually going to make rice, and then I just decided not to, so I apologize for that. We're gonna let this cook for about another 2 minutes here, and then I think it's gonna be ready to serve. I'm gonna give it a taste and make sure that it's where we want it. Based on what I tasted earlier, I think it's pretty good.
Would you ever use an immersion blender on something like this, or does it just depend on the consistency you want?
Yeah, well, like when I talked about the paneer kofta, that gravy is blended. So you could use an immersion blender, or you could use a regular blender or food processor. This dish doesn't require that. If you read my chicken tikka masala recipe that I made for the staff cookbook, I think I put in there at some point that you can either blend up your sauce or you can just leave it chunky. Some dishes specifically call for like a specific texture, but again, this is food. It's about making something you enjoy. If you prefer to have a chunky sauce, it might not be traditional, but if you enjoy it, that's all that really matters. So. All right. Yes.
Yes, when you go to pick out a type of plain yogurt, does it matter if it's sweet or unsweetened?
I would say so. Yeah, definitely don't get flavored yogurt because I've tried to make a curry with like vanilla yogurt before and it does not work. As far as it's sweetened or unsweetened, whether it's going to be a huge difference, I don't think so. Like if you're expecting kind of that little bit of bitterness that you would associate with like plain yogurt, then I would go with that. So quiet again. I am Serve Safe certified, just so everybody knows. I know I'm not wearing gloves right now, but it does have some kick to it. So if you're not a fan of spicy, then be careful, okay? If you'd like to come up and grab one, feel free. Oh, shoot.
Oh, no.
I forgot to garnish, guys.
I'll just go back for a second.
I actually Googled it.
Just bring your cup back and go another round. Oh, that's great.
This is delicious.
You wouldn't even know.
Round two.
Right. Another thing
And that
we
looks
do,
pretty
make
too.
a
It is so pretty.
homemade naan. That's what we would use with that.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope that you found something interesting and enjoyable about that. I don't know when the next cooking program will be or what it is. Probably in the fall will be the next one that I do. If you have any suggestions, feel free to leave them with a staff member at the library or me if you see me. I work upstairs usually at the reference desk. If you ever have any more questions, let me know that too, and I'll do my best to answer them, okay? Thank you so much for coming.
I came in a few minutes late. What is your name?
My name is Dania.
Denise. Okay.
I don't think I actually said that at the beginning of the program.